Good morning, everybody. Welcome again to another of these conversations on an early Saturday morning with my coffee. This morning, I'm very happy to be talking to Cleola Kunene, who is an award-winning startup and scale-up expert, angel investor, and entrepreneur serving on the senior leadership team of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Similar to Jamaica, JC. She also serves on various boards and on the investment board of Edge. Now we're gonna dive into this conversation and learn a lot about the work that Cleola is doing. Welcome, Cleola. I know it's afternoon where you are. Good morning from Jamaica.
Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. We've been trying to set up this conversation for some time. Super happy that we're able to be doing it now. And I wanted to just jump in quickly. We're having a conversation offline where you're talking about enabling purpose-based businesses. I'd want you to pick up from that conversation, but also talk a little bit about what are some of the key drivers that's driving this work in Southern Africa and from your experience.
So thank you very much. I mean, when we're talking about enablement, just to give a little bit more context, it's really about the understanding the socioeconomic impact of access, right, and sustainable access. So if you look at an economy like South Africa, or even, similar to other economies in Africa, if you do NGO work, it's amazing because it provides, facilitation of support. However, it can be short-lived, right? But if you focus on the enablement piece, you'll see a far greater socioeconomic impact. And for instance, if we look at a thing, and I just gave the example of water, right? If you give water infrastructure as opposed to just constantly bringing water trucks, etc., or give people the tools to build their own water reserves or their own infrastructures in terms of that space, they're able to serve the broader community as well, right? And in South Africa, it's a good example is what we've seen, for instance, when we had an issue in terms of electricity. So we went through a phase where our economy was growing, but our electricity supply couldn't keep up. And then we started seeing a significant issue around, electricity cuts, which was really problematic for our economy. And we took a real dip from that. But then we not only rolled out, new solutions, green energy solutions, but we enabled people in the local communities and even in the agricultural communities, rural areas, to implement their own green energy solutions, from solar power to wind power, etc. And we've seen amazing innovation come from that. Not just what has been created, but we've seen even people take that a step further and create new technologies and new innovation. I remember the one gentleman created his own fuel, for instance, right? A green fuel. And recently, we have cars that are running on water power, for instance, right? And houses that are just being provided energy with really interesting ways. Everything from mushrooms being used to, from all kinds of devices. But what we've really seen is once we've enabled people, we've educated, provided the solution, say green energy is a possibility, here's access to some of the technologies, but also access to market opportunities, access to funding, which is key. We've seen that enable people better than just, coming in with a short-term solution.
Okay. All right, so I want to zoom out a little bit. Welcome, Ruth. Some persons will be joining in. It's going to be a very open conversation. Let's zoom out a little bit. For persons who aren't fully aware of what demographics of South Africa, all of playing for us, what's South Africa like? What's the entrepreneurial ecosystem like in South Africa, and what is driving growth for and opportunities in that ecosystem?
So for anyone who hasn't been to South Africa, I think when they get here, they're very surprised, pleasantly surprised that it's an amazing, country. Like it's really, really well set up in terms of infrastructure, right? If you look at Cape Town, for instance, it's equal to Melbourne, right? If you look at Johannesburg, I don't know, but it's equal to many big cities, right? And so we have a great mix of incredible urban areas with real infrastructure, national roads, the whole nine yards, with different types of industries, as well as amazing landscapes for tourism, which, we have beautiful, beautiful, beautiful landscape. Just to put that out there that, South Africa is really gorgeous.
Beautiful.
But we only have we only have about 60 million people, right? And it may seem like a lot, but for an economy like ours, where most of the people in the country are quite young, it's not sufficient, right? And also, we have a huge problem with, yes, we have a high youth, but a high youth unemployment, which means that the youth are not necessarily able, the current landscape in terms of the industries are not able to absorb the workforce, which is something that we're fundamentally focused on solving for, right? So if you look at South Africa just holistically, even historically, how our economy was structured is that it is a commodity-based economy, right? So we fundamentally are commodities. We provide the top 10 commodities in the world, and not even, just the top 10. I mean, you can kick a rock and there's a commodity here. We've got everything from talcum powder, zinc, iron ore, not just what people really know in terms of gold, platinum, those types of things. So there's really an incredible array of commodities. Now that's both good and bad, because if you have a commodity-based economy, it's very extraction-based and not necessarily production-based. So we've really tried to focus on creating more a production-based economy, and that means more manufacturing, more primary agriculture. We in fact have a lot of primary agriculture. We are the top providers for some of the fruits and vegetables in the world, whether it's pitted fruits, mangoes in the region where I come from is actually the top provider globally. And then also we're seeing a huge surge in wellness products coming from South Africa, right? So a number of the products that we're seeing now on people's shelves that, are becoming quite popular, like such as the African potato, moringa, all of those types of things are coming from here. So our economy is, evolving and diversifying. And if you look at the other industries that we also diversified significantly into, technology, healthcare, and for instance, also education. And post-COVID, we've seen a big growth in edutech. Edutech? Is that what they call it? Edutech, yeah.
Yes.
Online learning and all of those things. But in terms of how the landscape is structured, it's almost like a pyramid structure where we have very few large enterprises, but they kind of make up the bulk of the economy, and very large scale, what we would call informal enterprises. So over 60% of our workforce basically are employed by entrepreneurs, by small businesses. And then included in that, we also then count cooperatives. So what cooperatives are, for instance, also small scale farmers, where we see small scale farmers, coming together to provide certain products. And I'll give an example. For instance, we export sorghum, right?
Yes.
To Asia, and those are mainly from small farmers. And then also a huge flower market from the cooperative agriculture market. So we have a lot of small businesses, more small businesses than large enterprises significantly. However, if you look at the scale in terms of how many people they can employ versus also the revenue and the GDP that we see from the small businesses, it's not as high. So we're trying to increase that to the small businesses in our economy absorbing 90% of the workforce. That's why we have a significant number, like a huge focus on SMEs in our country.
Right. So I want to kind of pivot to the work that's being done in that sector. And specific to your work through the JSE. But how is, for example, when I was in South Africa, I realized that there was a lot of cooperatives, particularly when it comes down to agricultural products. Is that a formal policy of government to kind of promote our cooperative enterprises? And generally, what are some of the policies that the government in South Africa is using to promote entrepreneurship and support these industries?
So we've recently just updated our legislation for small businesses. So, updated the act and the policies around small businesses. And there's key focus areas for small business development in South Africa. I have to mention that the support in South Africa is significant, significant. We've ramped that up to something that is incredible, right? So if we look at it just from a government perspective, the cooperatives are a key focus area, and that's become, even now in legislation, a focus area because of the fact that we're not only focusing on high growth, big commercial farming, but understand that not just for growth, economic growth, but also for food security, we need to support small scale farming. Mm-hmm. So yes, that is critical for us. Then, if we look at it in terms of just where we focus, even in recently in terms of our budget speech, that a large number of companies have graduated, in terms of the work that's being done, but also if we see the focus and emphasis from the government, they tell that story of companies that have graduated and been supported through the initiatives, but also the gaps that exist, right? So where do the fundamental gaps exist? The fundamental gaps exist still in funding. Mm-hmm. And gaps that exist in red tape. So we still have significant red tape that needs to be reduced. And we have a focus now in terms of the new projects that have been launched from government in terms of red tape reduction, to look at how we can make things easier, not just for South African businesses, but also for other businesses that want to come to South Africa, right? So if a business from somewhere else wants to come and partner or do business in South Africa, we're also looking at how do we reduce red tape, right? So that's a key focus. Then access to finance on a few levels, which is facilitating funding for funds, and then also facilitating various types of funding for small businesses directly from government or through the private sector, but also looking at new structures that make it easier for companies to access funding. And I'm going to say an unpopular word, but we're trying to move away from a Eurocentric lens, mm-hmm. Looking at businesses and more looking at businesses that are relevant or measuring businesses based on what's relevant for our economy.
Yes.
We've introduced a lot of new types of funding, mm-hmm. and funding solutions, as well as how do we assess companies, how do we make things better and easier, and of course, a lot of education. Mm-hmm. So just in terms of your second question, the work that we do in the JSE, particularly the work that I've been focused on, is very, very much linked to that. All right. So it's not separate to what is needed for our country and our economy to thrive. The big thing was focusing on acceleration. So we focused on how do we expand medium-sized companies, because we have quite a number of medium-sized companies that are not quite graduating fast enough, mm-hmm. to become large enterprises. And that is critical, not just for those companies, but if you look at an economy like ours, in order for the value chain to thrive of small businesses, you do need more really large companies that benefit from that, right? So we've been quite successful with that. In fact, we've now worked with over 50 companies with an average revenue growth of 38%. Wow. So yeah, it's incredible. And we've seen job increases of over 17% for those companies on average. So, and yeah, go ahead.
So, how have you identified? I know, and I want to talk a little bit about your capital matching program as well as the other programs that you're doing, because I was fortunate to kind of see how that was working, and I was amazed by the level of participation and involvement from um, private sector banks and other individuals. But how are you first identifying these individuals, nurturing them to a stage where you can say, okay, they can take on capital, and then moving them up the value chain? What is happening to facilitate that kind of growth?
This type of growth, whether it's the accelerator or the capital matching, is an ecosystem play.
Okay.
So the companies that we source within the ecosystem. So those companies have already been through incubation. They have a level of maturity. They are, you know what I mean? They are getting support already.
Is that incubation happening through the government incubation programs, or are they private led hubs, whether it's a tech hub or an agricultural hub?
Both. So we don't kind of say, okay, just government, although majority of them are from government incubation programs.
Mhm.
We also source companies from, private hubs and innovation centers and incubation programs. And what we've seen is that the best way is to work with companies that already have a level of support and been through a level of, where they have the fundamentals down, right? And within that, it just makes it easier then, especially with the accelerator and companies that have a level of maturity, to help them, through that next stage of growth.
Right.
You can imagine if you've only still just starting to figure out your quality, say, for instance, if you're producing a specific product and you're still trying to get the quality right, if we help you with market access and next thing you have to 10x that supply, you're going to fail. Yes. So we're not trying to set the companies up for failure. We're trying to set them up for success. So even when we identify the companies, there's a rigorous selection process. There's a rigorous assessment, even a high level valuation. And that's specifically for the accelerator to assess how these companies, would fit in terms of their peers, and what are some of the things that they would need to shift. Some of the companies that we've worked with have expanded into other markets, into the US, European market, and other African countries. And we've seen those companies even grow by 1,000% within a year to 2 years. Yeah. So it really is that they're ready for that next stage. They just need certain things to be unlocked. And then a level of governance and corporatization, that's key, right? Because without certain corporatization and governance being put in place, which a lot of companies don't really structure properly, they're not able to raise capital for that next round of capital raise, whether it's equity or debt, right? So we look at that and just the maturity of the leadership team as well, and then certain operational efficiencies and stuff like that. And when it comes to the capital matching, it's a little bit less rigorous because we also include smaller businesses, but we put them through a funding readiness process. Okay. So the funding readiness process is really just training, number one, education. What are the different funding types, from the fundamentals to what is right for your business. We also include legal training so that they understand what are the contractual obligations of what they're getting themselves into, but also how to protect their businesses. You'd be surprised how many companies and entrepreneurs don't plan for what happens to their businesses if something happens to them, right?
Yeah.
They just have no idea or even think about things like that. Yeah. So we help them with even certain fundamentals, and then help them also with their financials, telling their story, cleaning up their image a little bit. So that takes a few months. And then in essence, we also work with the funders at the same time, right? We work with a funding ecosystem. And why is this so critical? So if you look at the lead time from the time somebody wants funding to the time they get funding, it could be even a year, right? Yeah. Depending on how ready that company is. And if you look at the funders want good pipeline. Of course, they want the best companies that's the right fit for their mandate and exactly what they're looking for. And SMEs are looking for the right type of funding. So bridging that gap between funders and SMEs and small businesses is critical, because if you don't bridge the gap correctly, you're not going to get that level of success. And this has been a very, very successful initiative. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you're not only providing a space, an ecosystem for the development of the businesses themselves, but you're providing an ecosystem and actually helping the funders to understand the businesses themselves that they are interacting with, so that by the time the businesses are able to get funding, that both the funders will be educated on the nature of the businesses and the businesses owners would be educated on what the funders are expecting. Amazing.
Yes.
A little bit about your capital matching. How is that done? And what's the structure of that kind of program?
So last year we started in Cape Town with one big capital matching. This year, and the scale that you saw is nothing compared to what happened this year. Yes. Just on average, if we look at approval rate, especially for debt, it's on average about 40% in South Africa, right, for small businesses. And there's many reasons.
Approval rate for debt financing for businesses.
Okay. Yes, generally, right? And we managed through that initiative last year to grow it to 60% first time, right? So that was the first, 62%, in fact, that was our first try. Yes. And we've learned a lot since then. We now rolled it out to 3 regions. We've basically been engaging and training and supporting over 1,000 companies this year. Wow. To try and get them ready. Wow. We have not, however, gone to the regions with all the companies, because the rest will navigate next year. But if you look at the 3 regions we've gone to, collectively, we've basically matched over 300 companies in November, because we did the entire roadshow in November. Okay. And out of that, we're expecting to raise probably something like $30 million in total for these small businesses, which may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot for, considering the size and scale of the businesses, because we're not talking about huge projects or huge businesses. And most of it is going to be a mix of government financing, which includes some grant financing, debt financing, and we also try and produce more cost-effective debt solutions for the SMEs that go through this program. Yes. And then also some equity financing, and then we also have some alternative financing solutions in the mix.
Right. So I was fortunate last year, or in later the years, to see this program in action. And I really applaud the initiative, and I think Jamaica could learn a lot from that. We are trying to move along the supporting small business piece. We have introduced a number of initiatives. However, I think the part we're missing is the incubation on the financing side as well. In addition to the fact that you guys get the funders in a room, get the business owners prepared, sitting in front of the funders and doing a lot of proprietary work before even that happens, so that the funders have an understanding of who they're trying to do business with and vice versa. So I think it's something that we can definitely learn from. So one, I want to applaud that work, and I know that your work specifically at the stock exchange is critical to that. Let's kind of go a little bit more into understanding some of the issues that confront businesses in Southern Africa. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing businesses come to you with, and that you have to deal with at the pre-financing stage, before they even get to the funding?
I think the key thing is education. When I go and do talks, and I just did a talk recently, and it's like 1,000 people in the room, and and entrepreneurs all waiting to hear me talk about funding. And when I ask who wants funding, everybody puts up their hand, like, yes, we want money in the bank, right? Yes. And I use this analogy, and I'm like, everybody wants the wedding day. Very few people want the marriage, and no one wants the divorce. So everybody wants money in their bank accounts, but nobody is willing to do the work to understand actually how that's going to be sustainable. So a key thing that I realize with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they don't actually understand why they need the money, or that this is now a commitment that they're making. And there's no such thing as free. You're now basically making a commitment to someone else. And even if you're thinking, but it's just that, it's still a commitment.
Yeah.
So there's still a commitment and a liability for your business. And so I think the main thing that I see is a lack of education about what it actually means to be funded, and what that obligation means to your business, and whether you can actually afford that obligation, whether it's equity, whether it's debt, and even grant financing comes with obligations, right? So there is no such thing as somebody's just going to give you money just because you've got a great business. Yeah, I've got a great business. Why doesn't anyone want to fund me? So that's lovely, but it's not that simple. And also there's a lack of understanding that it's competitive, right? So especially in the equity space, if you look at VCs, it's highly competitive. VCs are looking for the best return. They're looking for X amount of growth, etc. So if you're looking for equity VC funding in particular, you have to have that next business. So understand also, education is a big gap. Companies don't know where they fit in. They don't know what's the right type of funding for their business. They don't also understand what is the requirement. So for instance, what is the liquidity requirement for specific debts, right? What is the paperwork requirement even for purchase order financing? If you want purchase, most people are like, but I do have a purchase order. That's not the only thing you need. So the biggest challenge immediately is lack of education. Secondly is companies not having the basics in place in terms of their financials, not keeping track of everything. And I encourage even the smallest business, keep track of everything, even if you're still a one-man show and you're buying data for your business, or whatever you're buying, keep track of it. There's so many free tools online today. You don't immediately have to hire a financial person. But then the other thing is also understanding, do you really need the money, or do you need a better business model?
Yes.
Because perhaps money is not going to solve the challenge that you're having. So
yeah. Very, very important points. I want to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial community that exists. So Jamaica has a strong kind of entrepreneurial underpinning, similar to South Africa. There's a lot of small businesses in Jamaica. As a matter of fact, I think Jamaica has one of the highest startup and failure rates in business in the world, which is alarming on its own, but it also tells a story of people who are willing to undertake risk and to start in initiatives. Is there a similar kind of a culture in South Africa, and is acceptance of failure part of that culture? Because I think one of the big problems we have is that, yes, we have a healthy appetite for starting and taking risk, but we also have a very negative attitude towards failure and the redemption from that failure. What's the attitude around those things in South Africa?
I mean, South Africa is very much an entrepreneurial. We grew up with, even South Africa's history during apartheid, people were always entrepreneurs, and that's just the core. Even if they were selling something on the side of the road, right? There was always this drive to see how can you find a way to make money, and it's very. Yes, there's also been this culture of find a job, get a good education, etc., but mainly figure it out, right? Because I think similarly in many African countries, this remains true. The more problems you have, the more innovation and entrepreneurship you have. And there's more opportunity because you're solving your own problems. And that's really
Power
it.
of entrepreneurship.
Yes, that's fundamentally it. No one's going to solve your problems for you. So we are big on solving our own problems, right? So if anybody's going to solve a problem I have, it's going to be me. And so that's what we're seeing, why there's such a drive towards entrepreneurship, and why so many people are constantly we call them hustlers, right? They're hustling, right? We don't even use the word entrepreneurs. They're like hustlers, right?
Yes.
Because where there's an opportunity, they're going to be like, okay, I'm taking this opportunity. It's also problematic a little bit because you find some entrepreneurs with 3 or 4 businesses. and ideally for them to be sustainable, there also needs to be a level of focus.
Focus on concentration. Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a role for mentorship in all of this? What happens in terms of in your training program? Are you guys guiding? Just if you have an entrepreneur that he has I don't know, selling chemicals as well as having a small farm and making handbags. What kind of guidance on how do you navigate those things from I guess education standpoint and mentorship standpoint?
So there's a lot of mentorship, a lot of coaching. We have in South Africa what we call ESD. So it's enterprise supply development. So it's a legal requirement, even for corporates, to provide supply chain development and enterprise. So within their own companies that provide services to them, they have to provide a level of support, especially to the smaller businesses.
Oh, really?
And yes.
So for large companies, you're saying to those large companies, you have an obligation to mentor your smaller suppliers so that they can actually fulfill the requirements?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. We actually have made it a legal requirement because otherwise you're also always going to have the same big suppliers. Sorry, there's so many birds here. I don't know if you can hear all the birds. But there's so otherwise you're going to always have the same large enterprises providing the same, support, especially if you look at, for instance, tech space. Globally, there's always the same tech players, right? So you have to fundamentally provide support for smaller companies, and those bigger companies even have to provide secondary support for those companies as well so that they can scale. So they start small. So that's a legal requirement. So we have ESD, and we have ESD programs throughout the country, and there's a certain level of the company's profit that goes towards that. So legally, that's required, and we measure that, and the company's measured on that, and they have to report on that as well in terms of what they've done. So you'll see in South Africa, mentorship is a big thing for companies, and also there's a huge focus on ensuring that we also help them sustainably scale, right? And not just remain small. Obviously, some companies will remain small, and that's what they want, that's fine. But, where it's feasible, we also try and make sure that those companies grow. So that's legally required. And then we also have development organizations. Some of those organizations are, your usual incubators that have memberships and things like that. And then, of course, we also have development organizations that are funded by government. So we, especially in the township and in the rural areas, we have rural development organizations, we have township development organizations, and we have youth entrepreneurship development organizations. So we have a strong focus also ensuring that youth get the relevant support so that they are educated and enabled to also run their own businesses and also have access to not just funding and things like that, but access to market and access to education and access to mentors throughout the country as well.
Amazing. No, I love it. What role is technology playing in this landscape? Is it tech sector? I know that they're pretty large tech companies in South Africa, but what is happening in the tech sector in South Africa?
So I think, tech is we've seen globally, it's not very different in terms of South Africa. There's a huge, take this, agri-tech, fintech, edutech, health tech. So there's a huge focus on implementing and integrating technology in every aspect of our lives. All right. So that's the first thing. So that's created a significant boom in terms of technology, as well as some of the challenges that we've seen, obviously globally, such as cybersecurity and areas like that, has seen a significant focus on those tech areas. We have both really large players that are like globally big tech companies, right? Coming from South Africa and have expanded globally. But we also have seen that South Africa's got some of the best developers in the world, right? Because we have Silicon Cape and we have a booming,
What is Silicon Cape for those who might not?
So it's kind of like Silicon Valley, but the focus is really on enabling technology, but also enabling technology, development and also placement of people. So training them, placing them, making sure that they're equipped. That's why Amazon has built an office in Cape Town recently, because they're seeking new developers, right? AWS, Amazon Web Services. So it's basically because of the significant focus on technology. So we have a huge tech focus. I think in the past few years, over 70% of our VC funding has gone toward technology. And
any just range wise for us, how much funding has been attracted to that space?
I think on average, I think last year was about $400 million, if I'm not mistaken, between $300 and $400 million. So we're not talking about small scale, and it's not just like one type of funding. We have companies from the Netherlands funding, the tech space here, etc. Also because I think the labor force is more cost effective, right? It's significantly more advantageous to invest in the tech sector here. We have because of our financial infrastructure, we have one of the best financial infrastructures in the world, like globally in terms of regulation and just sophistication of our financial services. So we've seen from that a huge boom of fintech. Right. So a lot of intermediary services and technology services in terms of fintech. And even if you look at, for instance, our telecommunications, a lot of them have provided the services, and companies that you see in the rest of Africa mainly come from South Africa. Right. So it's really I would call it a breeding ground for innovation. And it's very important that we invest in innovation, because if we don't invest in innovation, we're going to be paying for someone else's innovation, right? Yep. So that's kind of the thinking. Not that we have it right, of course not. but we are really trying to focus on that. It's just that it's a very expensive and exercise, and it takes a long time to show maturity. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I know Stephanie and Ruth are on. If there are any specific questions that they have, feel free to jump in and ask as well. I want to talk a little bit. Everybody is talking about AI and how AI is working. I want you to kind of just talk a little bit about what is happening in AI. How are you guys using AI? And is that shifting anything on the content?
I think it's still early days in terms of shifting it, but we have seen significant development and introduction of AI, right, in terms of how we operate. Also, some companies, one of our technology companies, Supple PLC, also just launched their own AI platform recently, and we're seeing a lot of investment and focus in it, but also integration, right, into already companies and existing platforms. So there's some new innovation in terms of AI, but also a lot of AI integration. And then what we're seeing is also a mix of AI and robotics in South Africa, and a surge in that. which has been very interesting. And then I don't know if you're aware of this, but we also provide technology to NASA. So there's also a lot of focus on how we enhance those technologies. So we've got some companies that are providing some of those technologies. So we're also looking at, advancing that in terms of AI, etc., in terms of those services, whether it's to organizations such as NASA or other similar entities.
Amazing. So shifting focus a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about because we're familiar with the history of South Africa, apartheid, all of those. We're also familiar with the transition from then and to a quite inclusive and I would say leading nation on some of the issues. We see the advocacy taking place, whether it's around Gaza and Palestine or around just general finding an African solutions on the continent for the problems you're facing. What work is going into supporting women, minority groups, minority entrepreneurs? What's happening in that sector, and how has South Africa's history informed what's happening in that space?
Thank you very much. That's a really good question. So we've done quite a lot as South Africa to integrate with the rest of Africa in terms of not just it being a single economy advancing, but providing, or being leading in the Africa Free Trade Agreement to ensure that we have that level of sophisticated trade and technology and policy that supports that. Obviously, that's still in very early stages, but we're expecting a significant boom coming from that. And that provides a huge, not just economic benefit, but also socioeconomic impact, because then it provides people from, our neighbors, everybody, the opportunity to trade with each other as opposed to trying to export to another country, right? And not kind of paying all those heavy penalties and things like that. And hopefully, we can drive similar with other regions. In terms of South Africa, we heavily focused. We have we've got an amazing constitution. We really firmly believe in human rights and we believe in equality. If you look at diversity, we rank the highest, one of the highest in the world, right? And it's surprising given our history that we have such a high focus on diversity, but I think it's because of our history. Yeah. That we focus so much on diversity. I mean, even if you look at our official languages, we have 12 official languages. The 12th language is sign language, right? That's how inclusive we are. We're not like sign language is this like obscure thing. Yes. No, we're like sign language is the 12th language in South Africa. So you can actually learn sign language in school, right? Yes. So we take diversity so serious. We measure our companies on diversity. We measure our schools on diversity. So diversity and equality and equity is critical for us, right? That's something that we constantly work on. And then, of course, enabling bringing in the gender lens, of course, especially if you're looking at, areas with struggling with income and lower economic areas, there is still a lot of inequality between men and women. Okay. And there's a huge focus on financial literacy. There's a huge focus on access. And as I said, enablement. So because we all know that once a woman earns, she also makes sure that she multiplies that to the community as well. Yes. So there's a strong focus on that as well. And then, of course, access to education. Access to education is critical. We provide free education at school level and we provide free education at university level, right? So free education is available for anyone. But, there are also private schools for those that want to go to a private school, but there are government schools that provide free education for all students throughout the country. So it's accessible, right? And then in addition, what we really are focused on is constantly looking at it also in relation to how we allocate funding for development programs. So there's funding allocated towards people with disabilities, even the entrepreneurship space. So catering specifically, even if you look at our budget allocation nationally, even in our budget speaks, you'll see that there's an allocation for entrepreneurs with disabilities, right? So there's entrepreneurs in the rural areas. There's women entrepreneurs. There's a specific allocation for female entrepreneurs. There's a specific allocation. So it's not just a broad, okay, we're supporting entrepreneurship. We look at what the
Targeted
gaps.
funding for groups that are requiring that funding.
Exactly.
So there's often, if you've been to Southern Africa, there's often this rural urban, well, I guess many places where this rural urban kind of difference between how investments are being done, and is that similar, and how is that gap being bridged?
So it is similar, but if you look at it, so we have a few regions, and each region almost has its own flavor of focus, right? And that's why you'll see that the funding for that region, yes, there's general funding and support, but each region almost has like specific things that they are known for, and where there is money going towards them, right? If I use, for example, the Eastern Cape as an example, we have some of the best wool in the world coming from the Eastern Cape. So
wool?
We have sheep wool, yes.
Okay,
wool.
Okay.
Yes, so we compete with Australia and New Zealand for sheep.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, right? So in that region, for instance, farming there's a huge focus on supporting, sheep farmers, right? It wouldn't be the same in Cape Town or Gauteng, for instance, because it's just a different requirement, right? Not saying that, there aren't technology businesses and other types of businesses, but you have to kind of look at what is that huge industry boom, and where do most people put their focus and need support in a specific region, right? If we look at, for instance, in the north of South Africa, the huge fruit farming, right? Significant fruit farming, but also minerals, platinum, coal, gold, all of those things. So you've got an ecosystem and a value chain of small businesses that support those big industries as well. So if we look at like the primary production for specific regions, we then cater for the value chain within those industries in terms of the entrepreneurs, and we even have specific programs. For instance, in one of the regions, so there's a lot of programs around supporting companies that work within the mining value chain, or companies that work within the agricultural value chain. And that's where especially that whole concept of rural versus urban comes in, is that the companies just don't necessarily need the same level of support, or, you know what I mean? Because their focus in the terms of their industries are just so different.
Okay. So I want to shift our conversation a little bit to the global perspective. You and I have participated in events for Global Entrepreneurship Week, for example. We're in Australia. As well for the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit more to a global perspective. When you have looked and interacted in these sessions and kind of understood more about the differences in ecosystems from different places in the world, what are some of the lessons that you have learned interacting? Yes, with the work that you do in South Africa, but just broadly, globally. And the kind of part B to that is, are there opportunities for greater collaboration and facilitation? For example, had one of these conversations with Najir from Bangladesh around what happens in his ecosystem as well. So do you see areas for collaboration? Do you see ways of a kind of transfer of knowledge, transfer of capabilities along through these organizations?
Absolutely. I think, just shifting like in terms of what I've learned, one is that we're not good at promoting ourselves. We're not good at amplifying our country and communicating really who we are and the opportunity scope. And I think that's one of the challenges, is really creating a unified communication solution, because perception is everything, right? And I don't think necessarily we're there yet. And if you look at how other countries and regions have promoted themselves versus us, and I'm like, no, we actually significantly better. Why are they getting so much investment and support? But it's just that we, and you guys at Point Global would know a good story and a good brand matters.
Yes. It's something I will focus on a lot. The ability to tell your story properly helps in many respects. Yes.
Yes, and also speaking the right language, right? Speaking the right language to the right people in the different ecosystems. I think there's definitely, even if I look at the Caribbean and places like Jamaica, there's a huge opportunity for collaboration. There's a huge opportunity for market sharing, and scope for growth, because we have a booming market. South Africa is still a great entry point for the rest of Africa because of the infrastructure. Now, Africa, huge young population, huge, right? And it's just growing and scaling. And if we look at what's going to happen in the next few years, it's very exciting. I'm very excited, right? So we need that level of collaboration, but we also need to look at how do we, do business together more. Why? Because we also not so focused on that Eurocentric view of, doing business. We're saying, how do we do businesses with people who look at diversity and, look at business similarly to us, and look at what are the needs for socioeconomic development as well. So it's not just about extracting resources. It's not just about, somebody coming in saying, I know it all, but somebody saying, I want to really collaborate. How do we work together? How do we invest? Because there's also a lot of capital here, right? And a lot of capital that needs to be invested in, and people looking for investment opportunities. And similarly, right, people from other countries looking for investment opportunities. We have, and I have to mention, we have incredible governance, right? So not just for institutional investment, but even for us, small scale investors, VCs, even angel investors have to comply to a level of governance, right? So the moment you're dealing with somebody's money in any aspect, there are rules, right? So we have sophisticated governance in place because we understand also that we want to protect our people, we want to protect the businesses, and we want to ensure that things are sustainable, and I keep using that word, but it's very, very key for us that it's not just short term. We understand that we are planting, seeds for trees that we won't sit under. And that's the way we look at it. We're growing this country and the diaspora for the next generation. So collaboration is critical for us.
Okay. So for persons who might be listening, they think there's opportunities for them to collaborate. They want to understand more about the South African entrepreneurial ecosystem. Where would you say they should start? What's the entry point to understanding the space, understanding the business environment, finding maybe businesses that you're interested in collaborating with? Where would you advise be the first place to go for a point of reference and to move on from there if people want to collaborate with Africa and with South Africa specifically?
Yes. So there's about 4 different entry points I can suggest. The first is our Department of Trade and Industry, of course, because they have people set up in all the regions, right? Department of Trade and Industry.
Okay.
So we have a Department of Trade and Industry, and then we have a National Business Association for each country. For instance, we would have a Jamaica South Africa Business Association, and usually we would have somebody in the region that facilitates some of those collaboration. And then also, of course, with the JSE, we facilitate collaboration for both private capital as well as institutional capital, and private business as well as listed business, public businesses, right? So we do that as well. We recently hosted delegations from a few countries, both in the East and the West, who wanted to know about South Africa. So we also facilitate that and also help them with the connections with the relevant government entities. And then we have an organization very specifically called Invest SA. Invest SA is for any business that wants to know about South Africa or also wants to even set up a business in South Africa or anything. The team are incredible, and they will help ensure they facilitate everything, whatever you want or need, whatever connections you want to make, or if you want to do a roadshow of the country, they will facilitate that with the various institutions and make sure that it's well coordinated. So those are the various ways that any organization can engage with Africa.
We have about 5 minutes left in our chat. I've been asking you a lot of questions. So I have a few more I could ask, but I would also allow you the opportunity to ask a few questions from your end to understand the Caribbean and the Jamaican space as well. So I'll turn over a little to you. And
no, that's true. So, I mean, I kind of have I looked at a lot in terms of what's happening in the Caribbean, and I think it's quite an interesting market. And I would be keen to understand your perception of how we could collaborate better, considering that, obviously, usually people go to the same markets because it seems attractive, but they don't really understand what's happening in specific markets. It's just, again, the marketing thing, right? Or knowledge. So, knowledge being power. What are the things that, from a South African business perspective and investment perspective that we can look at?
Right. So I think there are several levels where I see strong collaboration possible. I think one, South Africa has developed a pre-funding space that is compelling. I think Jamaica could learn a lot from that. We have it existing, but it's more a private sector led initiative. It's around private individuals seeing the global trends and kind of building out ways for entrepreneurs to also participate. So there's some on the institutional side. I think there are some ways that that collaboration can happen for funding. Jamaica also has one of the most sophisticated financial markets in the region, similar to your stock exchange. We actually have innovated on that a little bit, which I think is compelling and attractive. In that Jamaica has a social stock exchange where for purpose and social enterprises can actually list. And we also have a junior market where small companies with under 50 million Jamaican, which is, if I can't do the quick conversion now, but I think it's about somewhere in the region of 500,000 US in overall revenues can actually list and create funding. So I think at the institutional level, there's some work that can be done. But also similar to South Africa culturally, where we have a lot of creative industries, where we have a strong tourism product that has been developed for many years. I think those are areas of immediate opportunities that I see. Similar to Jamaica, South Africa is very beautiful. Those are ways that I see immediate ways of cross-pollination and collaboration. But beyond that, in the similar way where a space has been created through your capital and matching initiatives for just nurturing persons who can support, whether that's from a funding perspective or even a governance perspective. There's a lot of, I think, collaboration that could happen in that respect. How do we go about doing that? How do we create this kind of bridge to facilitation? Is something that I think a lot more work and thinking would have to go into, because I think we have seen that for impact to happen, as you have kind of articulated in our conversation here, is one, you need a level of government involvement in the process. but you also need to incubate the financing side, who are providing the capital, as well as the persons who are driving the innovation and taking risk. So there's the opportunity to kind of create that vehicle between spaces is kind of where I think most of the work should be done. So from the Point Global end and from Jamaica's end, as we seek to have more of these conversations, maybe that's where some kind of innovation for collaboration needs to happen. And who knows, maybe it starts with these conversations.
But we're happy to even facilitate that from a JAC perspective, because that's what we do. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've done that for many regions. So it would be keen to, it would be important for us to look at the opportunities and see what we can explore. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So thank you, Cleola. This has been a quite informative conversations. I don't know if Ruth or Stephanie who has any questions from their end, but I've certainly learned a lot that I'll have to digest, and I'm sure our audience, once this has been released, will also benefit fully from this conversation. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Ruth, Stephanie, any?
No, I don't have any questions. You asked them. You pretty much asked them. So yeah, you asked them. So, but it was very informative, Cleo. It was very nice to meet you as well. I definitely want us to keep in touch with each other. Like we have each other's email address. Definitely want to keep in touch with you and talk to you about some other stuff as it pertains to NGO stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think Ruth is good, but thank you very much, Cleola. Thank you for this conversation this morning. Quite edifying. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.